Predator Deceiver is a beefy, flexible take on a classic streamer pattern. The joint connection between the front and back give it a bit of extra life, helping to tempt whatever big fish eater you're chasing down. The back half of this fly is built on an articulation hook shank. The side with the upturned eye is what you'll be attaching your hook to eventually, so treat this as the front end. Clamp your shank into the vise and begin taking wraps behind the eye. Cover the shank eye to eye with thread, ensuring you close off the open joint spaces. Stop your bobbin at the back of the shank. White saddle hackle makes up the tail on both the shank and the hook of this pattern. Select 4 feathers and prepare them like so, pulling off the fuzzy fibers towards the base of the hook and snipping the tag to a manageable size. You want your hackle to extend around 2 shanks in length past your tie-in point, so size accordingly. Add all 4 feathers in the same spot, slightly angling them out to achieve a nice, full tail. Cover the entire butt end of each feather on the shank to ensure durability. Next, advance your thread up to about a hook eye behind the front of your shank. White bucktail will fill out this back half well. Prepare a pencil width sized chunk by cutting it off of the larger section in your kit. Strip out any long askew fibers and pick out short ones from below, then cut the butt ends off square. Size up the bucktail so it reaches halfway down your saddle hackle tail. Lay the chunk on top of the shank and take a couple of wraps, loosening your grip on the bucktail so that some of the fibers spread around the shank. Tighten down your wrap so the bucktail splays out a bit, and lock it in place. Invert the shank and repeat this process directly underneath your last addition to fill out the bottom. Now grab 4 strands of pearl flash and 4 strands of green. Align them all together and find the clump's midpoint. Tie this midpoint in on top of your thread taper, with 1/2 of the strands facing back towards the tail. After some tight wraps, fold the front-facing strands rearward on the other side of the shank and take more turns. You can also spread some of the flash around with your fingers before tightening down to get it 360 degrees around the shank. You want this flash to not extend much further than the end of your saddle hackle tail, so take a couple of snips with your scissors if needed. Take your whip finishing tool and make a few turns on the thread head. Snip your excess, then brush over these wraps with super glue to lock everything in. That's a wrap on the back section of the Predator Deceiver. Put the shank aside for now to be added to the front hook in a few steps. Time for part 2. Secure your big Predator hook in the vise and tie in your thread behind the eye. Build a thread base down the shank until you reach where the hook starts to bend. Now it's time to add in your back section. Cut off a 5-inch long strand of articulation wire and feed one end through the top of your upturned shank eye. Then take the other end and bring it through the same way to create a loop that snugs in on the underside of the eye. Transfer your threaded shank to the hook so that the eye of your shank lays about an inch behind where the hook starts to bend. Put both tag ends of your wire on the hook shank facing the eye and start tying them in frontwards, holding the back at first to keep everything straight. As you get an eye's length back from the front of the hook, take the 2 tag ends and fold them rearwards. Wrap the back down the hook until you're almost at your original tie-in point, then cut the tags clean. Go back and forth across the entire laid down wire a couple of times to really lock this connection down. Since there's no hook on the back end of this fly, it's pretty unlikely that it will pull out, but this is a good habit to get into with any articulation wire attachment. Finally, cover all of these wraps with brushes of more super glue. The next few steps of this fly are exactly the same as what you did on the back shank. Tie in 4 more saddle hackle feathers off the back of your hook. I use the end of the back shank's bucktail as a reference for what you want these feathers to extend to. Then add some more bucktail in the same manner and reach as before, but make sure it's another hook eye or so back from the eye compared to where you did it on the back shank in order to make room for our last color. Prepare 4 more strands each of pearl and green flash, and tie them in the same way above the white bucktail. At this point you should have a little bit over a hook eye left of space in the front of the hook. Now go to your chartreuse bucktail. Prepare it in the same way you did the white, and measure it so it extends back as far as the white bucktail directly behind it. You'll want to add a little bit more bulk up here, So in addition to the top and bottom of shank, you can add some light chunks to the side as well. Shorten up your thread to make tight, precise wraps as you build your thread head. Your finished chartreuse additions should go completely around the shank and make a nice wide head that starts the rest of the taper well. The last material on this fly is some flashy mylar tubing in front of your chartreuse bucktail. Take one of the ends and start fraying it out with some close scissors or a bodkin. Stick your tool in just under where the tubing is already frayed and pull upwards to shred. Continue this process, lengthening the frayed ends until they'll reach from the eye of the hook out to where your chartreuse bucktail ends. Spread the mylar fibers to open up the middle of the tubing and slide it over your hook eye. Once you have the material where you want it, tie off in front of the frayed fibers and cut the solid tube. Go to work with your scissors cutting the short tag ends around the hook eye, and take a couple more wraps to cover any tiny tags if needed. The frayed mylar puts quite a bit of material around the fly, and I like to pluck out a bunch of it to make the flash a little sparser. Finally, grab your whip finisher and wrap up near the head. Snip your excess and go to some UV resin to harden up the thread head section. Some super glue works here too. Your Predator Deceiver is now ready to go. I like fishing these slowly to let the hackle do their work, but I'll use hard strips to get that jointed shank going. The Deceiver fly has been around for well over 50 years, but original and modern iterations of the pattern like this one will keep stumping big fish for years to come. Happy fishing, and thanks for watching.